book about Lieutenant Richard Falley, who built a secret armory in Mt Tekoa in Westfield and Montgomery. For years, the people in Westfield, Montgomery, and Southwick were aware of Lieutenant Falley's armory in Mt Tekoa. Well, I discovered that he was involved in the French and Indian War, several conflicts since then, and then in 1798, he manufactured 1,000 muskets for the Springfield Armory. I remember reading the article in the Westfield News. The chairperson of the Westfield Historical Commission wrote an article about Richard Falley and his secret armory in foothills of Mt Tekoa. Learning about Richard Falley, I know people outside of Westfield or Montgomery never heard of Richard Falley, but I felt he was a very important figure during the Revolutionary War. So I decided to write a book about Richard Falley. Now, what appealed to me that it was forgotten history. Didn't realize that this Lieutenant Falley existed, or that he was a accomplished gunsmith, or that he had an armory in the foothills of Mt Tekoa. Now, I have a certain history with Mt Tekoa. Mt Tekoa is the foothills of the Berkshires. On one side is Russell, Massachusetts. Then you have Montgomery, and then which is on top, basically a hill town, on top of a hill, and the other side of Montgomery is Southampton. So this is quite frankly, it's an outstanding place to build a secret armory, because you had this Moose Meadow Brook. Well, Richard Falley had a house in Westfield, and he also had a house in Montgomery. Now, the house in Westfield, he started as a gunsmith in roughly 1761. In that time frame, like 1769, he started manufacturing flintlock muskets in the foothills of Mt Tekoa. Now, the thing about Mt Tekoa is that it had this Moose Meadow Brook. You need a brook, a constant flow of water, to power a water wheel. Now, a water wheel spins, creates power, and from the water wheel, they would have leather belts spinning equipment. Now, if you think of a gunsmith or blacksmith, he would have to hammer day and night a molten iron to manufacture something, to build something. But if you had a water wheel spinning and constantly pounding and pounding and pounding on a bloom of red hot steel, you could save a significant amount of time and energy, and you don't need an awful lot of people creating something out of molten leather. When doing my initial research, I found out that this individual had a military career. He was involved in 1756 when his father passed away. He was part of the militia. All able-bodied men between the ages of 16 and 45 had to join the militia. So in 1756, when his father passed away, he ended up fighting in the French and Indian War. In 1757, in Fort William Henry, the French and the Indians attacked Fort William Henry, and they all went to Fort Edward, where he was captured by the Indians and made prisoner. And he went they forced him to go up to Canada. So ultimately he was ransomed for 16 gallons of rum. And he came back home. This is all documented in the Reverend Ballantyne, in his journal, says that in 1757, he visited Richard Falley's mother's house. And when Richard Falley came back from Boston as a free soldier. So I learned about his military career Then we go into the future to Lexington and Concord, where the day after Lexington and Concord battle, he and 70 men marched out to Boston to help fight the war against the British. That's when they discovered that Richard Falley was a gunsmith. So they promoted him to an ensign, an officer in the militia, where he would, in Boston, repair flintlock muskets. Now, the division, thousands of farmers and militia would converge into Boston with their old rusty muskets, our brown Besses. Some of them weren't working. And here was an accomplished manufacturer of flintlock muskets who could repair these muskets. So he became an extremely valuable person to help out in the war against the British. Then my book goes back to Westfield. Here comes actually it was Colonel Knox at the same time. In January 1314, Colonel Knox went through Westfield with 59 cannon on their way to Boston. Now the unique thing with Richard Falley is, Richard Falley House is on 16 Court Street. Across the street was Clapp's Tavern. So Colonel Knox stayed overnight at the Clapp's Tavern. This is why I picked up in my book to bring in Colonel Knox, who became a General Knox, and the famous Knox we all aware of. Then I move in my book to the Battle of Bunker Hill. At this point in time, Richard Falley was promoted to a lieutenant, where he commanded a company of men. Their job was to repair muskets. Again, you have to visualize the thousands of militia were involved in the Battle of Bunker Hill, and they needed muskets to be repaired, fixed. So Falley, that was his job. They appointed him the Master Armorer for all of Massachusetts. In 1777, they created an arsenal in Springfield. Now, this is a place where you stored weapons, gunpowder, cannon, muskets. And it wasn't until much later that they established an armory in Springfield, Massachusetts. Kind of an important distinction. But when I learned about his military career, and he was appointed the Massachusetts Armorer for Massachusetts. So when I realized that he was involved in the Battle of Bunker Hill and involved with the establishment of the arsenal in Springfield, I realized that he was a forgotten person. He had done all these things in terms of being a master armorer and involved in different battles, but history has forgot about him. Following the Revolutionary War, Richard Falley passed away in 1808. Now he's buried in the old cemetery in Westfield, Massachusetts.